This is Gareth Aden, and I am here on May 24th, 2017, as a representative of the Nashville Bar Association and its Historical Committee to take the oral history of a past president of the NBA and an outstanding trial attorney and bar personality, Frank Grace. Frank, good afternoon.
Good afternoon.
Is it true that to your good friends and bar associates, you're often known as Amazing Grace?
Yeah, to some. Some call me that. Whether I'm known as amazing, I'm called that. I don't know if I'm known as amazing, but I'm called that.
Could you give us your full name and your birthday?
Frank Grace, Jr., July 13th, 1943.
And where were you born?
Abbeville, Louisiana.
And how so was that?
My mother was from there, and she met my father in Louisiana. He'd gotten a degree from LSU in 1940. They met, married in 42. He was in the Navy. He was overseas, and she was living at home in Abbeville.
Was your father's name also Frank?
Yes.
And I believe he was from the large metropolitan area of Baxter, Tennessee.
That's right.
What was his history and what work did he do?
He went to Vanderbilt as an undergrad and finished here in 39, then went to LSU and finished at a master's in December of 40. Then after the war, he got a PhD from University of Illinois, went to the University of Michigan, faculty there in political science, and taught there for 34 years and retired from there.
Tell us a little bit about your mom. What was her name? And
Marjorie Golden Grace. She was born in Abbeville. Her father was Irish, but her mother's side was pure Cajun, Canadian, Acadian, as the case may be.
Did you have any brothers and sisters growing up?
3 brothers and 2 sisters. I'm the oldest of 6, and they're all still with us.
Wonderful. I take it that somewhere fairly early in your life you moved to Ann Arbor.
In 1948.
And what was it like growing up in Ann Arbor, Michigan?
Ann Arbor was a fantastic place to grow up. It was a little town, about 40 to 50,000 people. That was towards the end. It was probably smaller than that when we first moved there. Because the university was a big institution, large institution, dominated the town. But the town had been settled by Germans originally, German farmers, German craftsmen. The industry around there was kind of skilled, cameras and ball bearings and things like that. So you had skilled workers in addition to all the academics. It was just lots of things going on in the university town, as you can imagine. And
I'm guessing that it also had excellent schools.
It did. It did.
And I'm sure that was to your benefit.
It was.
Tell us a little bit about your early life, elementary school and high school.
Okay, well, Ann Arbor at that time, I think, had 4 elementary schools, 2 junior highs, and 1 high school. That's all changed, but it was kind of a glorified Mayberry in a way. It was small, so you got to know. By the time you got into high school, you knew a lot of people. The high school classes were large. Pretty typical elementary school. Got into scouting in 5th, 6th, 7th grades, played Little League ball, had odd jobs, mowing yards, shoveling walks, as you can do that in Ann Arbor. Later on, got a paper out in 7th grade and kept that till 12th grade. Worked at a place called the Michigan Union. My senior year in high school, Michigan Union was a student center, but in addition, it was a kind of hotel with the university. Put up visitors that were coming there, speakers and musicians.
I can imagine that working there was right interesting because Ann Arbor gets some pretty famous visitors.
It was interesting. A lot of people I probably didn't recognize, but some I did on reflection, some I knew by reputation at the time. I think I mentioned to you that Anne Rand was one of our guests one time, and from the libertarian right-wing political end of the spectrum. into the political spectrum. And then at or around, this would have been 1960, John Kenneth Galbraith, who was a renowned public intellectual at the time, economist, was there and checked in within weeks of one another, just kind of coincidence. And I remember Galbraith particularly because he had a book at the time, The Affluent Society, which was being talked about in places like Ann Arbor, I guess. And so I knew the title of the book, never read it, but it was about classical economics had been stood on, it was no longer applicable because the society had become so affluent that it could be manipulated by advertisers and corporations to the detriment of education, other factors. That his point was that affluence had covered a lot of ills in society that needed to be corrected. He was a liberal. But when I took him to his room, he offered me a tip. He was about 6'8", 10". He was a huge guy. And he emptied his pockets and gave me everything he had. It was 14 cents.
Did President Kennedy visit the university also?
He came through there on his campaign in the fall of '60. And it was interesting to watch the process. He had advanced people there several weeks ahead of time, and talking to us bellboys and others to arrange, and the staff to talk about arranging all the bags, the press corps, and all his entourage that came in there, and who needed beer in their rooms, cold beer, and the kind of nuts and bolts logistics. And I waited to about 1:30. He's supposed to be there at 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock. He didn't get there till about 1:30 in the morning. And campaigns in those days didn't fly. They took trains primarily. Yeah. And so he had been all over Michigan that day, and he was about an hour and a half late. And good staff work. He was there with a tremendous number of students waiting to hear him in the middle of the night. And somebody gave him a 3x5 card or something. Somebody from the University of Michigan had supposedly suggested something like the Peace Corps. So he let it be known that he was interested in the Peace Corps. And so I didn't see him at 1:30, but I did see him about 6 o'clock the next morning. I got up early, came back to get their bags ready, and he was coming out at 6:30 or something like that, having come in at 1:30. I mean, they're just grueling schedule.
You know, I think you mentioned to me the other day that while you were in either grade school or high school, you also spent some time overseas.
In '58, my dad took a sabbatical, and we went to Munich, Germany in '58 from February through August. And at that time, intercontinental transatlantic flight was really in infancy. So we took a ship from New York to Genoa in February of '58. Took 11 days. Did the same coming back. Really very, very interesting. It was good experience.
Were your grades reasonably good in school?
Reasonably good.
Yeah. You probably had, my dad was a professor too, and you probably felt the same need to bring home good grades.
Adequate.
As you got into your senior year or were moving along in high school, did you think about college and where you wanted to go?
Yeah. Well, dreamed about where I wanted to go. We always, given my parents' origins, Tennessee and Louisiana, we spent our summer vacations. Dad always taught summer school, but we'd spend August when that finished, either here in Tennessee or in Louisiana, or combination of both. So my orientation was really kind of towards the south. And when it came to schools, Vanderbilt was one. He'd been there, and my aunt had been there at Vanderbilt, and then I had relatives that had gone to LSU and Tulane, and so I kind of thought about those. But as a practical matter, the cost was prohibitive, and the University of Michigan, for the money, his dad kept saying, "You're not going to beat it," and he was correct in that.
You bet. You bet. So you began in what, 58 or 59 at the University of Michigan?
61.
61, okay. How did that go?
It went pretty well. I was frightened my first year. In Michigan, everybody lived in the dormitories the first year. And so I was frightened enough to study hard. I was fortunate enough to have placed out of German, took an advanced placement course in high school, and placed out of 2 years of German. So I didn't have a language requirement, which took a lot of time for freshmen and sophomores.
Sure.
They were challenges for most people that I knew. So I didn't have to do that. It freed up a lot of time for other courses and just more study time. So I was frightened enough that I did study and did well. I joined a fraternity. In sophomore year, I lived in the fraternity house. That was a lot of fun.
I remember that too. That was a great year.
It was not a banner academic year, but I guess it's a rite of passage, something that if you don't flunk out the first year, like so many people do, that second year is a real danger, because you think you got it mastered at that point, and then you think you can socialize and study, and that's a challenge.
So what were your study interests? What areas did you tend to go to?
Primary political science, institutional political science, study of government, political parties of other countries, government structure, some of the political history, and then I took a lot of general history and English courses.
Right.
Liberal arts.
Exactly. I noticed also that during the summers you worked.
Right.
Tell us a little bit about what you did during your summers or during the school year, if you worked then.
Let me see. First summer before college, I continued to work the Michigan Union. Really didn't work much my freshman year, because I had a job. I could work in the dining room at the dormitory, but it was one of these where you didn't have to show up. If you showed up, they would let you bus tables and clean up, and you log your time. And I really hated that. I just didn't do it. And the rite of passage I talked about, the fraternity, one of the life experiences. I knew it was wrong at the time, but I had initiation, and I went to fraternity initiation in the fall of '61 and skipped work. And when I went to work the next Monday morning, my boss was there with my check, and he told me, "Frank, you can come back. You should have called me. I would have come in and worked for you." When I told him what happened, and you might come back in the future, but right now you're out of here.
Wow.
So had the blues.
Yeah.
I needed to work. It was kind of humiliating, and I knew it was a dumb thing to do. I was very, very fortunate that we had a neighbor who was the financial officer of a small manufacturing company there in Ann Arbor. And they had some kind of need for a gopher, strong back, whatever, to work in the accounting business office there. I never took any accounting courses, but I worked in that office for the last 3 years. I was in college and in the summers up until I graduated. It was fantastic experience. They gave me all kinds of little odd jobs. It turned out to be cost accounting sorts of stuff. I would add up all the hours on a project, and they would do stuff and figure out how much it cost them to manufacture this product, because I would add up. It was data entry is what it was before there was data entry. I just add up all the time cards, and they divide it by the number of hours. They get some idea of how much they would put their general administrative cost on top of that. So, okay, this project costs us X, so we'll know how to bid it the next time, that kind of thing.
And if you were like me, the chance to work at a job like that when you come from a family with an academic background is an eye-opener.
Yeah, yeah.
Extracurricular activities at school, I noticed NROTC.
NROTC, I did that for 4 years and was commissioned on graduation. Other than fraternity and the job, there wasn't a lot of extracurricular, but my wife was on campus. She had a sorority up the street from ours. I lived at home my last 2 years. And my brother, who was 2 years behind me, he went on campus and worked out worked out very well. So I had my social base already established by the time I moved home. I had income, and so there wasn't a lot of extracurricular activities other than going to ball games, football games, basketball games, that sort of thing.
Did you meet your wife there at the
Actually
university?
met her in 7th grade in Ann Arbor.
How about that?
So we've known each other all that time.
Well, her family lived there at
Right.
that time.
Mm-hmm.
Frank, tell us, you graduated in 65.
Right.
And I'm guessing that you got married about that time.
I graduated May 1st, morning May 1st, 65, was commissioned in the Marine Corps that afternoon. Got married 14th of May, left her on a honeymoon, and essentially never came back.
What?
Other than to
What,
visit.
2 weeks? I don't know if I can take all that in. How was the Marine Corps? What was it like?
Well, it's an invaluable experience, and I tell everybody, if people ask, I said, did you like it? And they go, you must have hated it. I said, no, I actually loved it, because you had to. Otherwise, you'd be really miserable.
Yeah. Yeah, I think I understand what you're saying.
But it was extremely beneficial, rewarding, needless to say, challenging. A credential I couldn't and wouldn't trade for anything.
Was your wife able to follow you as you went through your assignments in service?
Some. First 6 months we were down at Quantico, Virginia, for what's called basic school. It's after OCS and after commissioning. But it's basically 6 months of learning how to be a platoon leader. And then you go out to the various specialty schools, communications, tanks, what if you're going to go that way. So she was with me there, and then I went to Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. She was there, and then I went, that took us into 66. September of 66, I went with a battalion down to Guantanamo, Bay, Cuba. She went home and stayed with her parents for that time. Came back in January and had orders overseas. And so in March, I went to Camp Pendleton, California, was there for a month, and then went overseas for 13 months. And she stayed at home that entire 14-month period. So in the last 2 years, 24 months, I was gone for 20 of those.
That's tough on you and on her. Did you have children early
Had
on?
one, born in May of 66, so we had one child with us at that time.
Where was your overseas station?
Well, different places, like I say, Guantanamo, and then I passed through Okinawa, was there briefly, and then back and forth there, and a large part in Japan. There's a Marine Corps Air Station, Iwakuni, Japan, south of Hiroshima on the inland sea. And then I got to Vietnam some. The unit I was with was kind of an amalgam of infantry and aviation units. There were 2 infantry battalions on aircraft carriers off the coast of Vietnam. And then we had the aviation units on Okinawa, transports there, and then fighters up in Iwakuni. And I would travel back and forth,
Right.
visiting those elements.
As you approached the end of your service in about, I guess, 1968, were you having thoughts about the future and what you were going to do when you mustered out?
Yeah, and it was about time, too. A lot of my contemporaries, in fact, all of them, virtually all of them, had some kind of career plans as they approached graduation. And I knew that I was going to be in the service for 3 years, so I didn't really think about law school or graduate school or anything along that line. Figuring something would turn up or happen, or there'd be some incident or something that guided me. So I came down to the last year and started thinking, and got to do something. I've got a wife and child. I'm not going to make a career out of the Marine Corps. All the benefits and qualities aside, that was not going to be a career for me.
Right.
Never thought it would.
Right.
So what to do? CIA and the Foreign Service had some appeal. They were hiring in those days, particularly the CIA. And I thought about that, but I've also thought that perhaps there'd be a language to really move up. There'd be a language barrier at some point, and got to thinking about it. No, and law school had always been kind of a default option, given my liberal arts background, and a lot of people had done that. I've always been interested in politics and civics,
Right. Exactly.
constitutional history, and so the elements of the law had been something I was familiar with, government structures, and a lot of people I'd gone to school with similar backgrounds had gone to law school. So that was kind of always in the back of my mind, and so I acted on that and made arrangements to take the LSAT and sent some resumes around, got into a law school.
Where did you take your LSAT?
I took the LSAT in Iwakuni, Japan. I was a one-person testing center. It's a commentary on the Americanization of the Vietnam, of Americans when they go places, even in a war situation. There were 4 places I could have taken the LSAT in Vietnam, for example, at least 4, maybe 3 in Okinawa, 2 or more in Japan, but they were up in Tokyo or other places several hundred miles away. And I don't know how it came about, but I guess I was corresponding with the people in Princeton about what the options were in the schedule and that sort of stuff. And I think they finally said, well, could we just send this to you? And so, well, there'd be a base education officer, this little air station. There'd be some major who had the title base education officer. So I said, yeah, send it to the base education officer, and he'll hand it to me, and follow the instructions you give him and how to package it, and send it back to you. So I sat there in the Special Services office and took the test, and he packaged it up and sent it back.
What were you thinking about in terms of law schools?
Vanderbilt in Michigan, the Safe School Wayne State in Detroit, and I applied to Vanderbilt first, and got a favorable response fairly early. I ultimately got a favorable response from Michigan, but I was literally moving my furniture in to my new home here in Nashville when I got accepted at Michigan.
Right.
So that would not have worked out. We're not going to go back.
So your wife and your child were able to join you then when you had gotten back
Right.
into the States for law school.
Right.
Where did you live here in town?
Started out in Green Hills, a little place called Oriole Place, off of Shackelford, Richard Jones Road in the Green Hills area, not far from.
I know where it is. Yeah. And did I should ask you your wife's name?
Carol, with a
And
K.
did Carol work while you were in school?
She came down here, had her heart's desire set on being an English literature teacher, and she'd prepared as only she could prepare and had all kinds of materials. And for her interview, and came down and interviewed, and the person in Metro School said, do you have any questions? And that was about the extent of her interview. And she made it, she could talk Spanish, but she made it clear she didn't want to do that. So the only job she was offered was teaching Spanish at Neely's Bend, and you couldn't get there from Green Hills. So there was a career thwarted and aborted. And 2 days before I started law school, she got a job at the Joint University Libraries. And another stroke of fortune. It was well received there because she did well. The group of friends she has to this day, the ones that are still alive. But the upshot of it, she was able to take courses at Peabody, and she got a master's in library science before I ever finished law school.
Perfect.
Yeah.
Sometimes it really works out. How did you like Vanderbilt?
I enjoyed it. Just being 3 years older than the other students and having knocked around the world a little bit, perhaps a little bit more comfortable um, uh, not as much trepidation about things. So I was able to kind of relax into it. Still concerned and worked hard and studied because I did have a fear of failure. I did have some stakes in doing well because I didn't have a lot of other opportunities. But I enjoyed the teachers. I enjoyed my classmates.
Who would we know that you can think of right offhand that practiced here in Nashville?
Well, Mike Kaplan, who recently passed away, Mike Philbin, Larry Snedeker, Alan Lentz, Bob Rutherford, Jim Beckner, probably several others.
Absolutely. Any professors that really, you know, that's everybody I think who goes to law school picks one or two professors they just enjoy.
Yeah, I think the best thing about law school, a lot of people complain and say that particularly the last year is, you know, superfluous, you don't need to do it. I found that there were 3 or 4 professors from whom I took multiple courses, provided foundations upon which I could build. Dean Wade, Introductory Torts, and I took a seminar later on, my senior year, with him, built on that. Paul Hartman in Contracts, then Introductory Corporations, State and Local Taxation. Hal Bigham in Uniform Commercial Code,
Right.
and then evidence that fit into my trial practice, preparation. Justice Harbison, I took a year of courses from Justice Harbison. The first semester was on the court systems of Tennessee, the procedures and process, and the second semester was actual trial techniques.
Tell me about work. My guess is with a child, being married, you needed some work during law school.
Yeah. One of these quirks of fate, I had a job when I got to Nashville. I had a very, very good job the summer before I started law school. My father and uncle had gone to school up in Baxter, a little town, with the then Adjutant General of the Tennessee National Guard. So when I got to town, I had a very nice job at the administrative company of the Armored Division here in the state of Tennessee. And so all the powers that be in the state were part of that unit. And this was a time, because everybody was trying to avoid military service or trying to get in the Guard. But that paid very well for that summer. So we had a good income. I stayed in the Marine Corps Reserve all through my law school. That you go.
Does that add some income?
That adds substantial income, and
very good.
You went 2 days a month, and you got paid for 4 days. And I was a captain with 3 years longevity, so that it paid fairly well. And sadly, then you go 2 weeks in the summer. And I'd get called back to active duty periodically to officiate or participate in funerals and get active duty pay for that. Unfortunately, there were a number of funerals in 68, 69, 70.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that was a tough period. Did you do any clerking with any of the firms here in Nashville while you were still in law school?
Yeah, I started with a firm in October of '69, second year, with a firm known as Willis, Knight, Chambers, and Barr. It had been my hope to join a firm called Hooker and Willis that I'd heard a great deal about in the summer of '68, which was an interesting time in Nashville. It was a thriving time with entrepreneurs, Mitty Pearl and other businesses booming, and John J. Hooker was running for office, ultimately going to run for office again. And so there was a lot of hullabaloo going on in Nashville at that time, economically and personalities. The papers were at each other's throats all the time, and the Kennedys were, the Hookers were kind of Kennedy-esque, if you would, and Hooker had worked for the Kennedys. And so I kind of set my sights on that firm. And by the time I was ready to clerk, I learned that the hookers hadn't practiced law since 1966. But it was still Willis, Knight, Chambers, and Barr. So I started clerking with them in '69, and when I graduated from law school, I started practicing with them.
Let's talk a little bit about, before we get off into your law career on your graduation from Vanderbilt Law School, talk about your family a little bit. You've told us about your wife, Carol, and that you had a child even while you were in the Marine Corps. Tell us about your family and your children a little bit.
Well, we had another child. Robert was born in Camp Lejeune in 1966, Memorial Day, and we had another child, Elizabeth, born right after law school in September of '71. I had to leave my wife in labor because I had to go and make an argument in front of the Court of Appeals for one of our senior lawyers. He was senior in the sense he'd been practicing a couple of years more than I had, and he didn't want to argue this case, but I can understand why. So it came to me to argue it, and I had to leave my wife in labor to go argue this case and come back, and lo and behold, she was gone. She was in the delivery room, and I was a father again. So that's how.
Career first.
I knew I was in trouble when the lawyer on the other side showed up with no papers. He didn't feel he needed to have a lot of papers.
I guess that falls in the category of the old jealous mistress saying about law practice. Your two children, Robert and Elizabeth, where are they now?
They're here. Robert went on, graduated from the University of Alabama. I went to culinary school at the Denver Institute of Arts, worked in a variety of restaurants, and it's a grueling occupation.
Yeah.
He married, and his wife is a veterinarian, and they opened a clinic in 5 Points in East Nashville, and doing very well. He manages that. That's basically a full-time job, and it's much more structured than trying to be in the food business.
Very good. How about Elizabeth?
Elizabeth went to Georgia. Did very, very well there. She worked in Jim Cooper's senatorial campaign in 1994. Finished that. Got a lot of responsibility there. It's kind of interesting. I was looking. She'd done very well, and I talked to some people that had done well here in town about what was a good place for a young woman to seek work. Who'd done well. And it was very interesting. 2 or 3 or 4 people recommended a political campaign. Because the reason is they're bright people, young, aggressive. It doesn't matter what side you're on. They tend to be young, aggressive, hardworking, and the networking is phenomenal. And you go forward, these people, these relationships tend to last, and you build on them. And so that has been good for her. She works for a industry publication called Book Page. It's kind of an industry. They do reviews of books, all the books that come out in a given month, and distribute that to bookstores and to libraries and whatnot. She's been there for about 20 years.
Wonderful. Do you have any grandchildren?
I've got 6. One is a step-grandchild, if you will, who's been with us. Elizabeth's husband had this child, 5 at that time. She's 25 or 6 now. And then we've got 5 biological. My son has 3 children, and Elizabeth has 2 boys. So they're 13, 2 10s, an 8, and a 6.
And that's wonderful. Mm-hmm. Frank, let's go back to the summer of 1971 when you graduated from law school. And I think we've discussed that you did go with the Willis, Knight, Chambers, and Barr firm after you graduated.
Right.
What enormous salary did they pay you?
$700.
And you thought you were rich.
That was okay. That was all right.
Where was their office when you first began there?
When I began clerking, they were at 214 Union Street, right across from the front door of the Stallman Building, Union Street at that time was just 2 lanes, and where their door is now, it's now a traffic island that separates the 4 lanes of Union Street. That building had been, the Hooker's office was a nice little renovated building, had fireplaces in the offices, but it was part of an urban renewal area, and it was torn down in 1970, and we moved up to the old National Life building at 7th and Union, and to the old legal offices of National Life. They'd built a big tower and moved there, so we moved in there.
Tell us a little bit about Bill Willis and the other people at the firm, but I'd like to start with Bill and sort of how it went and what it was like.
Well, Bill, my interview for the job was through Al Knight, and I went to the office to interview with him and Bill Barr, who was there, and John Chambers, and it went very, very well. Willis wasn't there at that time. Barr had a barber chair in his office, and somehow I wound up sitting in that barber chair, and the other guys were sitting around talking to me, and we were having, it was one of the more casual, animated interviews, perhaps. And then Willis came wandering in. Willis was getting ready to run John J. Hooker's campaign in 1970, and he was kind of the senior partner, although he was probably 35 or 6 at that time. Yeah. Knight was 32 or 3. I mean, these were young people. So Bill came in. You could tell he was short, good-looking guy. Had everybody kind of deferred to him. It was obvious that, these guys might want to hire me, but until Willis saw me and said, "Okay," it wasn't going to happen. And but Willis was moving quickly at all times, and so I got hired the clerkship, and shortly thereafter he went into the campaign. And all of '70 he was not there. Right across the street in Stoneville is where the Hooker headquarters was. It turned out. So I didn't really see much of him the first year. He was running that campaign. I worked primarily for John Chambers and Bill Barr those first couple of years, doing kind of quasi-business, helping them in business cases and matters that they had.
Right. You hadn't really, I take it, set on one particular part of law that you wanted for a career, or were you looking for something?
I had not, and I would not recommend that to anybody anymore. We can get into it later. These guys were, Barr and Chambers were business lawyers. Bill Barr had decided to do some securities work. He'd been out of law school at this point 5 years, and he'd done all the securities work for Minnie Pearl Fried Chicken and a couple other public companies at that time. John Chambers had gone to Princeton and Harvard Law School. He was kind of dealing with all the day-to-day issues of those companies, and they were having trouble at that time. On the other side was Al Knight, who was a litigator. He just returned from the U.S. Attorney's Office. He had taught at Harvard right out of law school, and then came back and started practicing with Hooker and Willis.
I didn't know that he had taught at Harvard.
Right out of law school, he taught there for a year. So it was kind of a fast-track group, all young again. I thought, I thought this was the way to go. But it was and Willis, when he came back from the campaign, obviously was a litigator too. So you had the two sides of the house.
And it was an exciting time politically. It was exciting with John Jay's entry into, I guess, for the second time in the governor's race, and then Nashville was in a growth spurt, as I recall, and things were happening.
Right. We were close. Willis, and particularly, was close to Dick Fulton. We represented the Tennessean and John Siegenthal and Eamon Evans. And they were embroiled in every political contest and controversy, because Dick Fulton was in the Congress then, came back in '75 to become mayor. In '72, we started representing the sheriff's department.
And Dick Fulton and I think Bill Willis were very close.
They were.
That was my recollection.
They were.
How did, that's a good picture of the firm and the youth and the talent there. Where did your career sort of go?
Well, I started out the general sorts of things a young lawyer does. Would have some divorces, have some DUIs, have some defending collection cases, whatever. Truth of the matter is there wasn't a lot of business in the firm. Willis had been gone for a year. Knight had just come back from the U.S. Attorney's Office. He didn't have any business. The business that Chambers had was trying to keep a lid on this collapsing empire. John J. Hooker. Barr is the only one that had any business, it turned out. And he had a real estate client, a fellow by the name of David Pollock. David was a real estate developer and a visionary in a way. He had helped develop the first condominium units in Nashville, over at Regency Park, over on Woodlawn. They literally had to
That was right across from my parents' home.
Okay.
I remember it well.
They had to pass a statute, a condominium statute, to permit a condominium regime. So then he developed some others around, and I would do his title work, and he would always have, he didn't hire the best construction people, and there'd be litigation by and for those construction people, and disputes with people who were buying units, and so there were the real estate and litigation involved in that. And then he did planned unit development out on Harpeth Trace, where you'd have clusters of homes, 3 or 4 homes, and then 3 or 4 homes, and then you'd have shared utilities and shared roadways, and so you had kind of reciprocal agreements and restrictive covenants that had to be developed for all those sorts of things. So I worked with him on all that, and worked with Vance Berry, who was representing Third National Bank on the financing aspects of it. So I was doing a good amount of real estate work and doing closings when he would sell these units and whatnot. And he went bankrupt in 1977. So my career veered into another direction at that juncture.
And now you became the Frank Grace litigator that we all know.
That's right. Well, it started to anyway. The way that came about, Bill Willis had been a founder of an institution called Nashville Memorial Hospital up in Madison. He had come from Hendersonville originally, and he had some acquaintances who were physicians in that area, Madison area. And there wasn't any hospital on the east side of the river. And the dream was to have a hospital there. So Willis and two of these physicians chartered Nashville Memorial Hospital in 1959. In 65, the hospital came into existence. And it expanded to about 214 beds, a good-sized hospital. And
I remember it well.
Yeah. And we did, started out, there wasn't a lot of work to do, but would have malpractice cases. The thing I say malpractice could be professional negligence. A nurse failed to give medicines, or different sorts of things that would give rise to claims against the hospital. And our insurance company, the hospital claims guy, would let us handle the defense of the hospital. And that was Continental Insurance. And it turns out that Continental Insurance also insured HCA and all their hospitals. HCA was developing here. This would have been the late 70s at this point. Right. And really growing. And Humana hospitals. Humana is now a big insurance company, but they started out as just like HCA, a hospital chain with rural hospitals in several cities in Middle Tennessee.
Exactly.
So I started doing malpractice defense work all around Middle Tennessee. In addition, the hospital required more and more day-to-day work, like any business would, and particularly a regulated hospital like that. They had medical staff issues, peer review issues, disciplinary issues, general contracting issues, and then later on you'd have ventures between the hospital and physicians buying into equipment, and there were regulatory hoops to go through with that. So I was almost day-to-day working on the corporate side for the hospital. up until the early 90s, in addition to the litigation that I was doing.
Fascinating. I'm certain, tried many malpractice cases defending the hospital in those cases.
I would.
That's rough practice.
It's not as rough as nursing homes.
Well, I suppose that's true.
Well, the great thing about the practice, my practice, and just the experience, it turned out to be the way things were set up. The hospital, when doctors would get sued, it almost automatically the hospital where they practiced or where the incident happened would be in a hospital. So the hospital and doctor would be sued together. And it was joint and several liability at that time, before McIntyre. So everybody was kind of clung together. Everybody was in for 50% or a third or whatever, how many number of defendants there were. So we all kind of clung to one another and clung together. But the upshot of that is that I got to work with so many doctors, attorneys, and Dan McGugan and Tom Higgins, Ward DeWitt.
Oh, yeah.
A good number of others.
The cream of the crop.
Yeah. And then John Connors decided he would leave the defense side at St. Thomas and become a plaintiff's lawyer. And the plaintiff's lawyers started getting more and more sophisticated and skilled, and it became a real sophisticated practice area. And then I did, because I was kind of around the industry and the practice, I also, over the years, represented a lot of individual practitioners like doctors and nurses and surgeons and anesthesiologists and whatnot.
Who were some of the lawyers that you came to really admire in the malpractice work?
John Connors was state of the art. He'd represented St. Thomas for many years and decided that, and continued to represent St. Thomas in their corporate and general business matters. But he was just such a skilled lawyer. A guy named Bob Shockey. Now Bob was out of Chattanooga, but
I know Bob. Yeah.
Later in the 70s, Randy Kennard started doing plaintiff's work and became very, very good. Other names will come to me on the defense side. Dan McGugan and his firm had represented doctors for ever and ever. Shelby Mutual was his client. Insurance company virtually insured all the doctors, and then they kind of went out of business. And the doctors started their own insurance company in the middle 70s, State Volunteer Mutual, and they branched out. So McGugan didn't get all that work anymore. Tom Higgins started to get it. Ward DeWitt would get some. Doug Fisher would get some. And then within McGugan's firm, C.J. Gideon would started to get a lot of defense work. I mean, he was tremendously skilled. John Connors, as he developed a stable of really good lawyers, John Day, then Bill Leader and George Nolan. These were guys that had all the courtroom techniques and kept up with the technology techniques, but also kept up with the case law and rules of evidence. They were the real package.
Was your experience that being up against really skilled lawyers helped your practice?
Oh, sure. Had to. You couldn't survive.
Without being at the top of your game. Any particular malpractice suits, Frank, that come back that you think about a lot, or that stand out in your mind as ones you're proud of, or not proud of?
Maybe the one that I'm perhaps proudest of is a very, very sad case. Happened up in a little town called Salina, Tennessee, small rural hospital, and the man running that hospital at the time, this was 1976, kind of early, had been the first administrator of Nashville Memorial Hospital, and he'd been let go and found his way to this small hospital. And they had a horrible incident up there where a little boy had fallen and hit his throat on some playground equipment, and was admitted to the hospital for observation. And they only had one surgeon in the hospital, and he'd gone off, it was his day off really, he'd gone off to play golf in Livingston or some other place, Livingston. And there was just a young new doctor in town. He was an osteopath, so he was kind of there was a professional jealousy between DOs and MDs in those days. And he came, this DO was from Texas, he wasn't even from around here, wasn't even from the local area. And there were two doctors, this surgeon who was a Filipino and another doctor, husband, wife, physician team who were also, they were internists, also Filipino, but they were the medical community this new guy had come into. Well, the upshot was this boy developed complications. His throat started to close, and this DO had to try and go in and establish an airway. And he was unsuccessful, and the boy died. Horrible, horrible experience up there. Well, the family sued the hospital and sued this physician, the osteopath. And the witness, one of the witnesses for the family was the surgeon who wasn't there. They called him back from the golf course. He got there too late. But he had all kinds of criticism for the doctor. And in those days, you had what was called a medical malpractice review board. You had to basically try your lawsuit, or the plaintiffs before the malpractice review board, and they would make a finding, and then you'd actually go to trial, and that result might be admissible to trial, might not. The rules changed over time. But anyway, tried the administrative review board case, interestingly, in the old WSM studios where they had the opera at the old National Life building. This was such a tragic story, but anyway, the doctor came in and testified against my client, but I had some background on him and some other things he'd done and failed to do, and he was an arrogant guy, and he had some vulnerabilities. The upshot of it was that the review board didn't find my client culpable, but suggested that the surgeon might have been. So I reversed it, the order of things, and John Dolan had to wind up suing his key witness.
How about that?
Yeah.
Before we leave your malpractice career, a big part of your work, I believe, and I'm not certain this is true, had to do with what eventually happened with Memorial Hospital. Could you tell us that story, because it's a big story in Nashville's history?
Okay. Memorial Hospital was what is known as community hospital. It was really the only freestanding community hospital. That is to say, it had no affiliation with any educational institution like Vanderbilt or any religious institution like St. Thomas or Baptist. It had just been created by its founders. There was federal money available at that time, in the Hill-Burton Act, to build rural hospitals. And so they just built this. And it operated very successfully. It grew. But the industry and the practice patterns grew over time, and hospital networks started to develop. HCA, St. Thomas, Vanderbilt, Baptist, that you needed a network of referral sources to your specialist. For example, a rural hospital in Hendersonville or Lebanon would refer it into maybe a suburban hospital that had cardiologists and oncologists.
Right.
And then you refer further up the line to the downtown hospitals. And Memorial could not they tried to get a relationship with somebody and could not. So while they were doing all this, and the handwriting was on the wall, they had to do that or ultimately they were going to wither and die. It had been a very successful hospital. It was thriving and profitable, but the future was grim. a for-profit entity called Health Trust, which was did primarily rural hospitals and small hospitals, came to Memorial Hospital and offered to purchase it. And the board, the leadership, very farsighted, very aware of the issues, thought, well, we need to look at this, and we need to perhaps get other counsel. Bill Willis was really identified with the hospital. He had a lot of emotional ties with the hospital.
Sure. Sure.
But the idea of the purchase of a not-for-profit hospital by a for-profit entity caused a lot of waves. People couldn't get their arms around that concept. I mean, you had these public charitable assets were going to be purchased by this for-profit. What does that all mean? And the people in Madison were frightened that they were going to lose their hospital, and you have some big corporate thing come in and take it away, and they wouldn't have their hospital anymore. So there was litigation, that and there was a competing hospital in Madison area that was owned by the Adventist, called Madison Hospital. Had other names over the years. But anyway, there were a couple lawsuits to enjoin or prevent the sale of Memorial to Health Trust. In addition, and primarily, the Attorney General by statute in this state, Tennessee had been somehow kind of ahead of everybody else, and it was a uniform statute, but they had adopted it before a lot of states, giving very clear authority to the Attorney General with respect to the disposition of assets of not-for-profit entities.
Exactly.
Now, it hadn't been tested before, it hadn't been used, but there it was. And so the Attorney General quietly intervened, issued subpoenas to the hospital for all its records, books and records, finances. They took depositions of the entire board, the consultants. They wanted to find out basically whether the sale of the hospital was in the public interest,
Right.
and whether there'd been any self-dealing in the board members, whether anybody was going to get money out of this deal, any kickbacks or anything like that. And ultimately, they decided to determine that the Attorney General determined it was in the public interest, made such a finding, submitted to the court, and said, "I'm not going to intervene, but I make this determination. I'm not going to prevent the sale, and I'm the only guy that has real standing to do it. These other people would like to, but the real authority to determine the best interest of the people of the state of Tennessee is this office, the Attorney General's office."
How long did it take you to work through all of that?
A year or so, or maybe more, because even after the Attorney General made his findings, the other parties did appeal their case and their cases, and so it took a little while longer. It was about 2 years after the sale before the hospital could do anything. The upshot of it was the Attorney General says, you take the proceeds from the sale, you'll create a charitable foundation, you'll expand your board, you'll conduct a nationwide search for an executive director to run the foundation, and I'll approve and look at the documents. And so we set all that up, but it was a couple of years before they could start making any grants. And the grants would be made to 501c3 corporations, charitable corporations or entities here in Middle Tennessee. Basically the service area of the old hospital, that's what we wanted to do.
And to this day, if I'm correct, you serve on the board of that charitable memorial corporation.
I'm on that board. I'm currently chairman of that board.
What type of grants do you make?
Well, we wanted to, they thought they wanted to do primarily healthcare related grants. It turns out there are not that many entities that are 501c3s that are in the health related field. So they started out, the first one they made was to the senior citizens home in Madison. And and they've done others since then, but that's a major facility. The activities there are extensive, and it's a major resource there. But aside from that, libraries in Goodlettsville and Portland and all around Middle Tennessee. The Hope Lodge here on Charlotte is a place where cancer patients who have to come into town for extensive treatment from out of town can stay. They have to be here for several days for their treatment. Can stay and have a room, have transportation to their treatments, have meals there. Without that Hope Lodge, for example, they wouldn't be able to do that, or it'd be horribly prohibitively expensive. The main reading room at the new library, we did that, but we do about 200 and some agencies a year, some as little as $5,000 and $10,000, others in six figures. Child care centers, halfway houses.
You can't work in charity in Nashville without knowing about your corporation and the good work they do. I mean, it's just been, it has a real impact on the community.
We've been fortunate, yeah. We had good leadership.
Yeah.
Same individual that led the hospital to its success, led the foundation in its early years.
If you don't mind, let's go back for a minute now that we've sort of covered your career, at least insofar as the medical industry and malpractice, and talk about your firm changed, I think, in 1975 to Willis and Knight.
Right. John Chambers had gone, and Barr left and started another firm, and so it was Willis and Knight from 75 until I moved on in 1995. We stayed a relatively small firm. I don't think we ever got more than 6, maybe 7 lawyers.
Right, right. What was it like to practice with Bill and Al, and what kind of fun did you have that you can tell about?
I can tell most of it. A lot of good lawyers practiced there and went on and started their own firms and did different things. Bill was a good lawyer and a fantastic advocate. I mean, if he was on your side, you had a bulldog, you really did. But he would get interesting cases. The school board desegregation case in the early 70s. I forget the circumstances, but he was hired to represent the school board and did for several years through Supreme Court appeals, restructuring the mapping, all the nuts and bolts. And Marion Harrison, who's now a bankruptcy judge, was with him on all of those things. Bill later became the head of, the chairman of the hospital authority and running Metro General Hospital in big disputes between Harry and Vanderbilt over staffing issues and the whole issue of public health in Nashville-Davidson County, which was a highly visible thing.
Right.
Represented the Tennessean and continued to do all that.
What was Al Knight like?
Al was brilliant. Scholar, thoughtful, analytical. He tried cases, and I say that in the broadest sense. He would try all kinds of criminal cases, high-end, complicated commercial cases, securities cases, did a lot of appellate work. Of course, all the First Amendment sorts of things. He had 40 liable cases against the Tennessean, and only one of them went to trial, and that was his first year back from Harvard. And he was a interesting guy. He kind of had his own practice, and he and Bill were close, but they kind of went on parallel tracks. Occasionally they would link up and try something together. It was always interesting to watch. Whether Willis was trying to get out of working on the case because he couldn't keep up with Knight, or Knight, he wanted to be with Knight, and Knight trying to get rid of Willis or whatever.
I didn't know Al well, but I did know Bill Willis, and he was such a interesting and in a way politically a powerful man in the community. Everybody knew him, and we miss him a lot. I'm sure you do.
Oh yeah, yeah, it was great.
Tell us a little bit about what happened later on with Willis and Knight and what you decided to do, and finish off your career.
Well, in '95, the hospital had been sold. That was our major client, and I'd been wanting to do more healthcare related things, and so I decided in February of '95, early '95, that I wanted to make a move, and I made a move to Waller Lanston, Dorch and Davis, in February of '95, and went there and did healthcare, a lot of healthcare regulatory sorts of things there. Bill and Al stayed together. Marion Harrison was there for a while and then went on to the federal bench. They continued to represent Tennessee and do other things to help. I mean, Bill had some high-profile criminal cases he tried, but they kind of started to drift. Bill became ill. Al had some health troubles.
Right.
And Bill passed away, and then Al kind of retired home, and the firm just kind of sadly faded away.
How long did you stay at Waller?
15 years, from '95 until the beginning, 1/1/11. So 15 years.
And they actually became, I guess, probably the largest healthcare law firm in Nashville, didn't they?
I think so. You'd have maybe some debate, but it'd be kind of an academic sort of thing. They were identified as that. Other people did a lot of healthcare stuff. Bass, Barry does a lot of it. The other firms do, but I went there, there were 72 lawyers. It was absolutely huge at that point.
What a change from 7 to 72.
From 7 to 72, and then by the 72 became 200 before I left. But it was a different setup. I mean, I'd be talking to hospitals in Utah and Alaska, all around the country. They would call in. They were part of the chains that we represented, HCA or Health Trust, or one of these different hospital chains that we represented. And they would call up for their legal advice, and they could be all over the country, literally.
How did you enjoy those last 15 years? Did you have a good time?
Yeah, I did enjoy it. A lot of people have problems with either you're a small firm person or a big firm, and the people in the small firms say, I can't imagine being in a big firm. How do you do that? Well, one way you do it is you come in laterally after 25 years, and you don't have to do all that climbing up to, up the ladder in a large firm. So I was partner level. I had my credibility practice, so it was comfortable in that sense. I just had to take care of business. The other side of it is that there were so many other lawyers around that could handle other aspects of issues that I had, or clients would come to me and said, do you know somebody that does employment work, or I need a business lawyer. I've got a friend would have, I got a business I want to sell or buy, or intellectual property. There's just all kinds of resources in a large firm like that gave depth to your practice, and didn't have to refer them out to somebody else.
I can imagine that was very helpful. When did you finally decide to retire, Frank?
Sometime in 2010. Approaching 40 years, and I just thought I had some heart surgery in '09, and it was time.
A couple of things that relate to what we've talked about that I think are important. You have obviously a history in the Nashville Bar Association. You've been its president. You've been very active in a lot of aspects of the Nashville Bar. How is the bar doing? What impact has it had on practice here and on you?
Well, I think the Bar Association is being challenged because of changes in the nature of the practice of law. When you and I started for many years, most of the lawyers did a variety of things. They would try lawsuits as well as maybe having a business practice or do that kind of representation. But physically we saw each other a lot on the streets. We all tried most people tried lawsuits, so you'd be in depositions or the motion day that you mentioned. There was a lot of physical proximity, and you knew their partners and they knew yours, and so even if you didn't have matters with these individuals and these so-called big firms, you kind of knew them.
You kind of knew the other lawyers. Yeah.
Beginning in the 80s, it started to change. The firms started growing, the so-called big firms, which were 10 or 12, and you and I started. The firms that later became 100 to 200 lawyers were 10 and 12 in 1971. But beginning in the 80s, the Nashville firms started bringing in laterals to meet specific needs. If they had a banking issue, they had a client that had a securities issue or a RISA need or whatever, in order to serve their growing clients as the Nashville business community grew, they needed different kinds of lawyers. So they would start bringing in banking lawyers, RISA lawyers, not just labor lawyers, but HR, human resources lawyers, environmental lawyers. So these things started to grow, and healthcare lawyers. It's a whole specialty in healthcare. Unfortunately, these specialties tend to have their own associations, and these lawyers tend to identify more and more with these professional associations than they do the local bar. It's hard for the local bar to find something for all its members to do. You can put people on committees, but the committees are 75 or 50 people, and it's hard to find meaningful work for that many folks on a committee, and they don't all have something to do every year. Periodically, committees might have something to do, but year in and year out, they don't. The historical committee really is the most active and relevant year in and year out of any of them. But I think it's an institutional challenge to the bar. It's been good for me because of the professional relationships, the camaraderie. I've enjoyed it, and I thought that was part of being in the profession, the shared experience of being a lawyer, however that might be defined in that day. The definition has gotten broader and broader, so it's more and more difficult, I think, for bar associations to be relevant. It's a challenge.
I think you've also been reasonably active in the Tennessee bar, haven't you?
I started, I was, in recent years, the Tennessee Bar has a thing called Tennessee Bar Association Seasoned Council Up to Something. It's the old guys, the old people. And basically what we do is when the Board of Governors meets at a state park or wherever they meet periodically, we'll just go there and hang out with them and do whatever trips. The Board of Governors got business, the rest of us just kind of go and hang out. But as part of that, you do get to meet the lawyers from around the state. You get to know what the issues are the Board of Governors are wrestling with. Prior to that, I was chairman of the Health Law Committee of the Bar twice, and they put on a big annual seminar, which is probably the biggest CLE seminar the bar puts on, Tennessee Bar puts on. They have national speakers that come in, and we were able to put huge programs together. Not hard to do that when you've got HCA and people like that in town. They can call some lawyer in a big law firm.
Exactly.
They want to come down here and help HCA. And then I was on the, when I was at Waller, I was loss prevention counsel, their insurance company liaison, handled ethics problems. So I spent a couple of years on the ethics and professionalism committee of the Tennessee Bar Association as they were doing a comprehensive revision of the rules of professional practice. About a 2-year project.
Well, I confess I had not realized how much, and I guess a good deal of this has been since you retired, but how much you do in the community. I mean, you've worked, done work with the National Conference of Christians and Jews. You've done work at Opportunity House, Progress Inc., and I think the mayor's called on you too, hadn't she?
Well, not currently, but it was a couple of administrations ago. There was a organization called the Mayor's Committee for Handicapped Citizens, and I kind of a liaison. I went to that as part of my dealings with the National Conference of Christians and Jews. It was kind of a community outreach, being aware of agencies and resources in the community to deal with different issues. And handicapped citizens was kind of an interest of mine. I don't know why, but it was. And there was a mayor's committee for that. Much more sophisticated now. There are a lot more agencies and professional resources focused on these, but I started and learned a lot from my affiliation there.
You've seen a lot of Nashville modern history. Any thoughts or comments about the growth of Nashville and what you've seen and what you believe's coming?
Well, we say it's incredible. I think the last 5 or 6 years are incredible. It's been steady. It's been good. Nashville has been changing for the last 45 years from a small little southern town into a more cosmopolitan regional business hub. It's changed a lot. When you and I started, there were 3 local banks and 2 big insurance companies. Those are all gone. Now you've got big locally grown companies and big companies that have moved in here. And with that, all kinds of new people and all kinds of new occupations and needs. But the building boom of the last 7 or 8 years has been absolutely phenomenal. But Nashville has had steady growth, good mayoral leadership, councilmatic, Bar Association. Members of the bar have been indispensable as members of the Charter Revision Commission, the Charter Commission, school board when they were going through all that turmoil. The bar has played a vital role in the growth of Nashville in a variety of non-legal ways.
Well,
non-litigation ways, I should say.
You really anticipated my next question. I know you've been, I don't know if you'd call it involved in a major way, but you've always been involved, especially with your connections with Bill Willis in politics in Nashville. And I wondered what your thought was about our mayors and how we've been doing politically.
Well, I think the metropolitan government, the uniform government, where we have one planning commission, one school board, one coach, you don't have the jurisdictional fights that you have in a Shelby County or Knox County that everybody can put their shoulder to the wheel at the same time. I also think that non-partisan election of council and mayor has helped avoid a lot of friction and a lot of finger pointing and the typical sort of political chest beating that you see, because you're not running for a party. You really don't have to satisfy this organization over here and its operatives. It's pretty often very clear who the Democrats and who the Republicans are, but you don't have the party labels. It's easier for them to get together and do things. The mayors have been uniformly visionary and with administrative capabilities. I mean, they've done a good, solid job, and each one is built on what the others did. I mean, Dick Fulton came back in '75 and
built the water sewer system, the fire departments out around the county. The county was not served in the early 70s, middle 70s, until Dick Fulton started putting in these kind of nuts and bolts, but indispensable stuff. Then he started 2nd Avenue and Riverfront Park. Other mayors have built step by step on top of all those things.
It really has been phenomenal. What have you and your wife been doing in the last few years? What does Amazing Grace do during the day?
Well, it's not very exciting. I tell everybody the biggest thing I do, the most important thing I spend most of my effort on, is making sure I don't do anything I don't want to do. So it's a retirement in its grandest sense. I take Vanderbilt lifelong learning courses. When those are offered, they're 3 6-week sessions a year. I do that. I do some board work, some Bar Association work, some grandchildren work. I'll go to the Y an hour or so, a couple hours a day. I have lunches, breakfast, drinks with people. I spend an hour or 2 a day reading newspapers from around the country, political and current events, keep track of that sort of stuff. It's a pretty relaxed.
That sounds like a great agenda to me.
Yeah.
It really does. You and Carol attend St. Henry's.
We have, yeah, for many years. Not currently, but we did. We were very active out there.
I know that neither of your children are probably going to be lawyers, but your grandchildren, if they ask you about, Granddaddy, should I think about law, what would you tell them?
Sure. But think about what it is to be a lawyer. It's not just somebody who tries lawsuits. Even if it's somebody who tries lawsuits, what kind of lawsuits? There are going to be environmental lawsuits. There are going to be truck accident lawsuits. There are going to be public interest lawsuits. You're going to represent legal services, public interest corporation or entity. What are the other things that lawyers do? So my point is that there are a lot of things that lawyers do that it would behoove me to think about. I mean, I had no idea really what was all involved, and I should have. I might have done things quite a bit differently. So yeah, there's a lot of opportunities, but I think there would be benefit to look at what other sorts of fields there are out there and how the law practice would fit in with those. And it would fit in with a tremendous number of them. A lot of people I know got law degrees, practiced for a while, and have gone to work for companies, start their own companies, run large public companies. A law degree and law experience position you to do a lot of other things, because even if you're trying lawsuits, you get to know an industry or a company and the sorts of things it does, and or an area like environmental law. You can be of major assistance to companies in a variety of ways. Intellectual property, doing trademark and copyright sorts of stuff for Bridgestone, Firestone. I know a little girl. I said little girl, that's pejorative of me perhaps, but this young woman went to Columbia and then UT and started with Waller and then went to Bridgestone, Firestone. She was going to do a little bit of intellectual property work. Well, the next thing she knows, she's at their trade shows out in Vegas behind the wheel of a Ferrari, or at Indianapolis for the 500, getting to know their vendors and whatnot. Now she's moving around and coordinating with their legal departments around the world, literally, Singapore and Japan. So she's going to have a very, very quiet intellectual property practice. Well, that's blossomed into all kinds of stuff, and that can happen in other ways. So have an idea.
I would be remiss not to ask you one other thing, but is there any person that we haven't talked about, judge, lawyer, or anyone else who has influenced your life or you wanted to mention before we sign off?
I don't think so. I mean, Bill Willis and Al Knight were tremendous influences. The law school professors I had were foundational elements that were indispensable. You know, practicing with Dan McGugan representing the doctors and Higgins representing the people I practiced with, either with one side of the case or against, they all fit in to the larger picture. But being with Bill and Al and being exposed to the types of stuff that they had brought in, the people they dealt with, the types of matters they had, let me develop. So those are the two guys. And at the beginning years, Bill Barr, I had some business skills and some experience dealing with business issues that other guys that just tried lawsuits did not. So I never got it with Hooker, Hook, and Willis, but I got a pretty good ride with the other guys.
Frank, I want to thank you for taking your time
Happy to
to
do
give
it.
us your history and for the accomplishments and the work you put in at the bar. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much.